Hello and welcome, viewer. My biggest takeaway from today's union budget is that it quietly but unmistakably carries the imprint of Operation Sindur, India's 88-hour war to punish Pakistan for terrorism 9 months ago. While I reported on Operation Sindur from the front lines, it was inevitable that India's next defense budget would reflect a new India as a war-fighting nation, one that, as policy, will not hesitate to launch attacks against its adversaries. Now look at the numbers in today's defense budget. The overall defense budget is up a solid 15%, rising from 6.81 lakh crore to 7.84 lakh crore. But the real story, viewer, is not that headline figure. It is where the money is actually going. Defense capital expenditure, which is essentially money for weapons, platforms, aircraft and hardware, is up by a striking 21 to 22% to 2.19 lakh crore rupees. That marks, in my view, a clear break from the incremental budgeting that has marked increases so far, and it signals intent, a clear signal that India sees itself as a nation on the front foot when it comes to national security, not a peacetime power hoping that deterrence is enough. There is a big push for aircraft and aero engines, areas brutally emphasized during Operation Sindur, where air dominance, availability and sustainability mattered as much as ground firepower. A big chunk of this budget is clearly in preparation for India's biggest ever defense deal for 114 Rafale fighters expected to be signed this year itself. Yes, the pension bill has risen to 1.71 lakh crore, up from 1.6 lakh crore last year, and that remains a structural challenge, as well as a reminder that our forces remain bloated, outsized, not the lean, mean machines current policy is trying to convert them into. But what stands out is the future-facing pivot. Defense research and development has seen a 15% hike from 14,923 crore rupees last year to over 17,000 crore this year. That's a 15% hike. That tells you something important, even if it is small. India has internalized that preparedness cannot rest on imports alone. Even though India continues to be one of the largest importers of weapons, wars will be won by those who control technology, supply chains, and sovereign capability. We cannot be an importing nation. Operation Sindur was a major experiment that proved the success of Indian weapons. Operation Sindur did not just reshape India's military posture, it reshaped our budgeting priorities. And that, to me, is the most telling signal in this budget. Here's the big defense deals that stand in front of the armed forces. Like I mentioned, the biggest of them all will be a deal for 114 Rafale fighters. I have it on good authority that this deal is going to be signed this year itself. Then you've got orders for 180 Tejas Mark 1A fighters, which are hugely delayed thanks to supply chain issues with American engines. But there's a big bill to pay for these aircraft as well. Then you've got a very expensive upgrade of nearly 270 Su-30 MKI fighters, which is something that the Indian Air Force wants done on priority. The Army has its eyes on a large fleet of next-generation tanks, which are going to cost a lot of money, and they're going to be built in-house. Tri-services drone capabilities is something Operation Sindur has proven cannot be ignored whatsoever. So drones, from small drones to strategic level drones, are all going to be a capability of focus. The Project 75I submarines for the Indian Navy is something that cannot be delayed any further. That's going to cost a lot of money because those submarines are going to be built here in India. And of course, on the back of the huge amount of offensive action demonstrated during Operation Sindur, the Indian Armed Forces need more S-400 and BrahMos missile systems. Now remember, one of the most important aspects of the defense budget this year, one that's going to bring a lot of cheer in defense research and development, is the 15% hike in defense R&D. That's not insubstantial by any measures. But what are the big R&D projects on the table? The priority areas: number one, hypersonic missile systems. There is a hypersonic version of the BrahMos that's also coming in. Laser and directed energy weapons rather than projectile weapons is an area of research that requires a great deal of focus. The big elephant in the room, stealth fighters, India's AMCA. We're the only country in the region that will soon not have a stealth fighter or a fifth generation fighter capability. That's going to be a big priority as far as R&D and prototyping is concerned. India, a couple of years ago, cleared a very, very ambitious homegrown project to build 6 nuclear-powered attack submarines. That's going to suck in a large part of strategic budget. And Project Sudarshan Chakra, which is India's overarching air defense multi-layered network that has been a big lesson since Operation Sindur. Tri-services unmanned systems cannot be compromised on. This is something that the Indian Navy, Army and Air Force need in large measure. And combat algorithms and AI tech. I've named a lot of weapons, but this is something that also cannot be delayed. India is strong in software. India is strong in algorithms. Combat electronics, algorithms and AI are going to be defining futures of the future battlefield, and a large amount of cutting-edge R&D will be going into these as well. Joining me live now, Vivek Krishnan, CEO and founder of SSS Defense. He is one of the most outspoken, candid founders and entrepreneurs in the Indian defense industrial space. Lieutenant General Raj Shukla is former Army commander with the Army Training Command, a best-selling writer and a person who has also spoken very, very candidly about the direction in which Indian defense policy needs to go for India to truly realize its strength. Welcome, gentlemen, to the both of you. Thank you for your time. Vivek, I'm going to kick it off with you first. Because you are in the trenches, as it were. You head a company that looks very closely at defense budgets and the kind of message it sends out. I've listed some of the highlights of today's defense budget. Why don't you start it off by giving me your big takeaways, your reading, Vivek?
Well, I think you did a very nice job of putting out the most important resultant impacts of this particular budget. But I just wanted to kind of talk about one thing. What you've seen as far as the growth of this particular budget, not just in headline numbers, but also in terms of the allocation that's going to be going in towards capital procurement and R&D. My reading of this is that that's an irreversible thing, right? As we kind of look at, it would be wrong for us to be just looking at this as being, just for 2026, 27. We've got to be looking at this as something that's going to be continuing and sustaining its path for the next several decades, so to speak. Because, the strength of our armed forces, maybe about 4 or 5 years from today, is going to be heavily dependent upon how much we actually flow into R&D. And one other important factor you just mentioned, which is basically AI-related algorithms. Well, that's a very, very important thing, and I think General Shukla has talked about that as well. It's not just the algorithms. Please understand that, Army does not work on software alone. It's also the hardware which basically houses the algorithms and which is capable of kind of working in multiple environments, which is important. So whilst you kind of look at the big budget plays, what I like to kind of look into is the subtle ones, which is to say R&D going to be, given an impetus. Through the DRDO, we expect to see a lot more of the R&D funds coming into the hands of the private sector. There was a certain point in time when DRDO used to kind of work very closely with DPSUs, and that was basically a closed loop. Today, that's going to be changing, and it's already been changing for the last several years, where the private sector is actually going to be doing most of the heavy lifting along with the DRDO to kind of translate some of that into real useful products.
General Shukla, your reading. You can also add to some of the points that Vivek just mentioned, but kick it off with your reading, your highlights, your takeaways from the defense budget.
So, Shiv, the numbers that you reeled off, they seem to be pretty generous. It could have been better, but so let me say this. The true measure of these numbers, their efficacy will be if they can sufficiently accelerate the ongoing national security makeover. So what must happen now? Or are these numbers good enough to do the following? Can they remove the roadblocks which come in the way of absorption of funds? Can they accelerate all the things that we need to do so that the reform process is hastened? And 3, we must invest in technologies and capacities of the present and the future and not of the past. Now, this is very critical. So I propose 2 + 5 + 2 formula, exact things that we need to do. And each of these, there's no time, they are happening globally. So we have no excuses not to do it in our context. So the 2 plus 5 plus 2 is, I say, the two rudimentary steps. One, the vocabulary and grammar of procurement has to change from process to outcomes. It has to be lethality and war winning attributes. The excuses of the past have to go. Otherwise, no matter what money you get, it will not be spent wisely. So it doesn't have to be, revenue and capital. These are all accounting metrics. We have to measure each investment in terms of the capacities and technologies that they carry to the sailor, soldier, airman in the fleets and formations. And therefore, to do so, what we need to do far more is to optimize outcomes from the fairly generous allocations. And I can tell you this, let me give you one figure. If by RE stage, we spend all of these 2.2 lakh crores for modernization, you'll get more. I know the system very well, but you take it from me. We'll come to the RE stage and we'll say So the allocations are really not the matter, the reform process. Now, what are those 5 combat initiatives which need immediate funding? One is the military needs to build base capacities in AI and these emerging storm of technologies in sync with the broader, technology missions. That's not happened in adequate measure. 2, we need to create these lethal frontiers on AI and drones as the Ukrainians have done. 3, Sudarshan Chakra means massive AD upgrades. Of course, piloted air power, but also drone missile force. If a drone missile force doesn't start in 2026, we'll be missing the bus. 4, we need, Shiv, to invest in capacities to grow our hemispheric influence. India today, the Lowy Institute tells us, is third in terms of comprehensive national power. So DIA, theater commands. And by the way, how many $1 billion do you need to create theater commands? Yeah. Why are they not being created? So, these 4 to 5 things. And 2 more. This IFA structure simply needs a metamorphosis. It was designed for a monopsony market, one buyer, one seller, no competition. This just has to go. You ask Chairman Diageo off the public platform, and he tell you the great problems that I don't blame the IFAs. We have created the process, but it simply has to go. And 2, you look at the startups, they are beginning to complain because innovation is being strangulated by regulation. So 2 plus 5 plus 2, if you do this, you will be able to absorb 4 lakh crores. And if you don't do it, you will not be able to.
This is a hugely important point, Vivek, and I want you to respond to that because you have a lived experience of this. It's not about allocation, it's about direction, it's about optimization. Stated intent has become cheap. Ultimately, it's about implementation. What have the last few years looked like for you in terms of the things that General Shukla has mentioned? Because I agree with the fact that allocation is irreversible, like you yourself said.
Well, General Shukla actually mentioned something right in the beginning. He said, outcomes, measure everything by outcomes. Now, the question is, we've not measured anything with outcomes so far. I mean, it would be the most difficult for any one of us to kind of look back at the last 10 years and then say how many years we lost because of the fact that we had to go through, so many years worth of paperwork, so many years worth of framing RFIs and RFPs and so on and so forth, whilst it could have very well been possible for the user in this particular environment to just simply call up industry and say, hey, come on, let's kind of see where this will kind of take us to. But we've lost 3-4 years in the course of that particular period of time. Teams have come, teams have gone, new teams have come in. They're trying to educate themselves with regard to what the process is. Now, you could say that in a way that is, a negative impact on the ease of doing business, right? And it also takes a lot of patience from the side of industry. I'm sure that even the armed forces are actually suffering. So General Shukla is bang on right. It's not that the armed forces don't understand that. They understand that too. They actually want to see a new flavor emerging where going from objectives on paper to outcomes and results has to be crashed to not, few years, but it's got to be crashed to a few months, right? The second point that I really want to kind of talk about this particular point, which is that a lot of things that we've actually talked about, in terms of new buys and so on and so forth. One of those outcomes which needs to be measured is, are you creating a sustained supply chain for the next few decades by simply buying from A, B, and C? Right? Now, yes, in a few cases you are, because of the fact that the alternative, which is kind of depending upon the Indian ecosystem to kind of suddenly throw out, equipment and hardware in the matter of a few years, is just out of the question. But there are several areas which are far out into the future, but yet there are countries which, in the current environment that they've been in, classic case being Ukraine, in the course of the last 3 years, Ukraine has actually developed one of the most powerful drone and counter drone ecosystems that you can find anywhere in this world. The Americans can't beat it. You had Anduril, which went in with its product into Ukraine, and the Ukrainians basically dissed it, saying it's really not up to the mark, right? So you actually created a lot of technology because of the fact that necessity was the mother of invention. And we don't have a war-like situation today. We don't have conflict at this point in today, but it's important for us as a country to start wargaming on tech very seriously and start looking at how we can create an ecosystem, not in next 2 decades or 3 decades, but maybe going from something which is an objective. Say, this is what I want to achieve. Don't talk about how it'll be achieved. Don't frame an RFP. Say, this is what I want to achieve, and let's see whether industry is capable of coming out with the products. If it is, great. You don't need an RFP. You don't need to go through an elongated process, right? But if it is not, then you know where to kind of go to.
Is there a way to do that, General Shukla? One gets bogged down with process in this country. There's bureaucracy. There are all these procurement procedures, etc. How does one get beyond those? I don't see a way beyond those unless, it's a enormous amount of political will.
Well, I don't think it is any longer political will. See, let me make this point. Political will has now become an excuse. Who is supposed to implement these reforms? If the Chief of Defense Staff, if the DRDO chief, if the defense secretary, who wiser than them? Who more senior than them? This excuse has to go. So perhaps we now need to go into a new system. When the new CDS is appointed, he has to be asked, will you deliver on this, this or this? If you can, please come in, or please don't. We will not want to appoint you. Trump has gone down 150 places and appointed Dan Kane. This just has to happen. Otherwise, the excuses will not go. If I take the job of CDS, it is my job to implement. What is this lobbying every file to the PMO? How is it going to work? And listen, this humbug has to go out. I just heard the finance minister say we'll create national champions in MSMEs. So why not national champions in defense and the startups? For example, Krishnan, if he's a chap who's good in drones, why shouldn't I publicly say yes, that the Indian Army will buy drones? What is the nonsense of L1? L1 has been thrown out of the window globally. Yeah. It is H1, the best technologies, the best talent. It is happening everywhere. Why can't it happen in our... So this humbug has to grow. There has to be accountability to the leadership of, military, civil, technological, administrative bureaucracies, and not the political class. I say this, I lose a lot of friends, but this just has to be said.
No, but what you said
cannot be at the highest level and say many. But two more things, just one.
Yes.
Look, Shiv, I want to give one example. See what happens. It is not bad intent. Well, last week, a startup was telling me that he got a product of, some capacity 10 GB. And the uniformed officer dealing with him told him कि सर इसको 10 GB को 2 GB कर दो क्योंकि मेरा procurement वाला वो नहीं बैठ रहा है मेरे को 3 वो टेंडर नहीं मिल रहे हैं now this nonsense has to go, no matter how well-meaning you are, because the country is suffering. And I know a whole lot of people like this. Now, this is just nonsense has to go, and my hunch tells me it will go. Because the time has come. And one more thing I may point out, we may not be Ukraine, but we are in a pre-war era.
Yeah.
We seriously need to wake up.
No, we do.
We need to know what needs to be done.
I just want to
that is the precondition for absorption of funds. Otherwise,
I completely agree with you. And also the idea of accountability is writ large. It's something that simply cannot be ignored anymore. I just wanted to make a few short, broad points about how Operation Sindur has obviously influenced this budget. And let me just show what I mean by that. A clear hike in the budget for new weapons. 21% is by no means unsubstantial. It's a large amount. Clear hike in the R&D for homegrown weapons. Hopefully that will be optimized, as our guests have just said. Number 3, a large emphasis on air power and aircraft that was in many ways inevitable because these are deals that are there in the pipeline right now, most notably the Rafale deal. Emphasis on new defense technologies is also apparent because many of those new technologies were used for the first time during Operation Sindur, and an emphasis on combat software and algorithms. Vivek, coming back to you now, the emphasis on homegrown technology, made in India, indigenous solutions, how much of a signal does this budget give to that? You've had a very mixed, I know your personal experience with your company has been a mixed one. You've been quite outspoken about, one thing said and one thing implemented. In which direction is that going? And how important is that, Vivek?
Well, Shiv, I guess my being outspoken is a separate thing altogether. My being outspoken is not going to change irrespective. As far as indigenization is concerned, I tend to believe that we not even scratched the surface. Let's be very clear about this. There are companies in India which span the whole spectrum, all the way from deep technologies to bare essentials, right? And many of those companies to this day have not really made a big mark in India, but have managed to get into foreign export markets.
Yeah.
Right. And that begets a question. When you've got Indian companies which are moving into foreign export markets, it means to say that the technology is indigenous, because it's not possible for me to kind of take some technology, license it, from, let's say, Israel or the United States, and then sell that across to a foreign country and then call it Atmanirbhar Bharat. That's not how it works. Foreign countries are not stupid enough to kind of look at Indian technology and then not ask questions as to what the origins of those technologies are, which means to say that the number of companies which over the course of the last 3 years have actually delivered to foreign countries in export markets. And that's great for the government of India, because the Ministry of Defense has got a phenomenally high export market target. So you see a dichotomy here. You have the Ministry of Defense, which is trying to push for larger exports, which means more indigenous products go out into the market. But you have the Indian Armed Forces, which say, yes, we need to have more indigenous products. But when there are products which are indigenously going into foreign markets, you don't have those products going into service in India in a large way. Yeah. Right. Now, this runs counter to the way in which most foreign countries would work. For example, if you kind of go to Serbia, Serbia's got a rule in there which states that if you've got a product, the first customer of that particular product has to be its domestic guy. It does not mean that they're going to buy 1 million of that, but they're going to buy a few hundred of that and put that into testing, and they're going to give you all the feedback. And they're also going to tell you at the same time that please go into foreign markets and we'll support you into those foreign markets. And when you can't go into foreign markets because domestic trumps foreign, like it's happened right now in Serbia, the government of Serbia said no exports, but I'm going to give you the support when it comes to, keeping your factories running. Yeah. Now, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the rest of industry is concerned, this dichotomy needs to get solved at the earliest. We need to basically ensure here that companies which are actually doing indigenous development, indigenous manufacturing, are given the ability to build scale. Because when it comes to conflict, the only thing that's going to be able to help you is put out that kind of scale. Quantity has a quality of its own, as several people would kind of attest to. You can't suddenly scale up on manufacturing of tanks, or for that matter, artillery guns or drones, if you really do not have that setup in place. And we've underinvested when it comes to scale and capacity when it comes to defense. Yes, you can still go back and say we've got the Indian ordnance factories, which have been supported for several years together. But then the results, barring a few exceptions, have not been very, very good. And we know that very, very well. If it were to be good, we would not even have this. We would not even be having this discussion today.
No, this is very true. General Shukla, I want your view on that, on this Atmanirbhar Bharat philosophy, which has been, a clarion call of this government. Some things have worked well. There are many things that still need fixing. In the light of this budget, how should that happen?
These startups are at an inflection point.
Yeah.
All that they need from the government is no meherbani. They just need orders, orders, and orders. We now 10 years into IDEX, the so-called national champions that we would have identified by now, 10, 12, whatever the number is, they just need orders. Because once those orders come, we see funding will flow and the other stuff will not happen. Even today, what is happening, and that is the unfortunate part about regulation, that the startup, which is, say, even got an award from the MOD, it doesn't get orders in sufficient scale. We have to learn scaling from the Chinese. The way they scale up. And now, if I may just make 2 to 3 more points, the finance minister in her speech, I think part A gives the vision and part B gives the nitty-gritty. So based on the allocations that have been made with the finance ministry to the MOD, let the MOD now give a precise vision and roadmap. That from these 2.1 lakh crores, this is what we'll create. By the end of the year, AI-enabled Northern Command, the beginnings of a drone missile force. Those the objectives should be set by the Honorable Raksha Mantri to the Defense Secretary and CDS Chairman DRDO, and all the problems that come in the way must be eradicated surgically. This kind of stuff needs to happen. Discretion. National security is so complex that you must enhance discretion. You can't constrain them in DAP because the nitty-gritty of decisions are such, you can't be looking back and say, what does the DAP say? When I was young, in my middle piece years, we were told rules are for fools. That jargon has to come back. Otherwise, these things will not happen. And, if I make 2 more points, look at what UK and USA are doing in the big picture reform. The British have said that since the military-industrial complex was broken and it could not be fixed by civil servants and soldiers, they brought somebody from the private sector to fix it. It would be something like, bringing Mr. Kalyani to fix the military-industrial complex. So let's take some bold steps like that. What have they done to the ACR channels, the reporting of general staff and procurement bureaucracies? USA has told those bureaucrats, L1 financial prudence is a political responsibility. It's not yours. You focus on lethality, timelines, delivery. Get this F-15 in 3 years and not 8. Now see, at least the others are attempting something. We can't go on with the same stuff, defense allocations and the same processes. There's that good, lovely couplet ki umr bhar galib wahi bhool karta gaya, daag chehre pe tha, aina saaf karta gaya. We have to clean the face and not the aina now.
Very well spoken, and I expected nothing less from the both of you. This gives us context, because the budget gives you one view, but ultimately it's how all of these resources are going to be optimized and used for what India plans to achieve. The outcomes need to be clearly defined, and there's no time to lose. Accountability has to be there. The procedures exist. There is more than enough money, clearly. It could have been more, as General Shukla said, but this is what needs to be done. India went to war just 9 months ago. There will be more conflict in the future as well. Thank you very much, Vivek, Krishnan, Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, for being with me here tonight. Thank you very much.